Some men bury their sins under desert moonlight, hoping the sand and silence will keep their secrets. Others, well, they live long enough to see those ghosts come riding back on the wind. And on that scarred midnight in Dry Mesa, Elias Boone learned that the dead do not rest, not when guilt still breathes. There it was, riding back through the desert night as if death itself had unfinished business. Elias was a big man once, broad-shouldered, a legend with a gun. But legends fade, and the last 10 winters had carved regret deep into his face. He'd built a quiet life on the far edge of nowhere, a cabin, a horse, a small herd, and the dusty peace earned only by a man trying to outrun his own memory. Tonight, though, something felt wrong, like a storm gathering beneath the sand. And then came the sound. Hooves, slow, heavy, relentless. Each thud echoed across the desert like the beat of a forgotten war drum. Elias froze. His blood ran cold, not because someone was riding toward him in the dead of night, but because only one man ever rode with that rhythm. And Elias Boone had buried that man 10 years ago, with shaking hands and a broken soul, after a gunfight that tore his family apart. His younger brother, Caleb. Elias whispered, his voice shaking like wind on dry leaves. Lord in heaven, tell me this ain't real. The horse emerged first from the darkness, a familiar dark gelding, dust-streaked and eerie in the moonlight. But it was the hat that stopped Elias's heart. A weather-worn brown hat, creased in the front, with a single silver concho on the band, bent from the day Caleb fell in blood and dust. The same hat Elias had buried with him. Yet here it was, riding back through the desert night as if death itself had unfinished business. A rider sat tall in the saddle, his face hidden by the brim's shadow, spine straight as a soldier, silent. The gelding stopped 10 paces from Elias, snorting steam into the cold air. Elias's voice cracked barely more than a breath. Caleb. Elias was a big man once, broad-shouldered, a legend with a gun. But legends fade, and the last 10 winters had carved regret deep into his face. The coyotes fell silent. The coyotes fell silent. And in that moment, Elias knew. He was staring at his brother's son, Jacob Boone, the boy Elias had abandoned to the world. You left him, Jacob said, his voice like cold steel scraping stone. You buried him in the dirt and rode off like his life meant nothing. Pain slammed into Elias's chest, stealing his breath. I tried to save him, he breathed. God knows I tried. Jacob dismounted, slow and steady, his boots crunching on the sand. The brim of Caleb's hat cast a long, accusing shadow. Funny, Jacob said. That ain't the way folks tell it in Lonesome Creek. He reached inside his coat. Elias's pulse pounded in his ears. A gun? A letter? What could it be? Jacob pulled out a worn leather notebook, Caleb's old journal, blood-stained on the corner. He tossed it at Elias's feet. He wrote about you, Jacob said, about the promises you made, and the way you broke every last one. Elias knelt slowly, picking up the journal with shaking hands. He couldn't bring himself to open it. Not yet. Not without falling apart completely. You came here for revenge, Elias whispered, his eyes fixed on the journal. Jacob didn't blink. No, not yet. He took a breath that sounded like a blade being drawn. I came here for the truth. A wind swept across the sand, cold as judgment. The coyotes fell silent. The lantern flame flickered, dancing in the sudden chill. Tell me why my father died, Jacob said, his voice raw with a decade of pain. And don't you lie, because if you lie to me once— He rested a hand on the revolver at his side. I'll put you in the same ground you put him. Elias looked at the young man. The same fire in his eyes that Caleb once had, the same wounded pride, the same hunger to prove himself in a world far too cruel for boys. His heart ached. "You deserve the truth," Elias whispered, "but the truth, it don't come clean in one breath." "Start talkin'," Jacob said coldly. He took a breath that sounded like a blade being drawn, and then came the sound. Hooves, slow, heavy, relentless. Each thud echoed across the desert like the beat of a forgotten war drum. The silence between them split the night like a fault line. Then, the sound of another horse in the distance, sudden, fast, urgent. A woman's scream, desperate and sharp, tore through the quiet. "Jacob, Elias, get inside, now!" A lone rider tore over the ridge, a lantern swinging wildly, chased by distant shouts and the crack of gunfire echoing through the canyon. Jacob turned, confused. Elias's face drained of all color. "That ain't no ordinary trouble," Elias choked out. "That's the kind that follows blood." The rider's voice rang out again, breaking like thunder. "They found you, Jacob!" Gunshots cracked across the desert air, closer this time. The past didn't just ride back wearing his brother's hat. It came armed, and it came hungry. The sun bled over the mountains, a fragile light on a world wounded by winter. I rode with a silence that had settled deep in my bones, the crunch of snow under my horse's hooves like a clock ticking down a man's last chance. The Bible was a warm weight against my coat, a promise. The rope beside me swayed, a stark reminder of another kind of promise. I wasn't riding in anger. I was riding to keep a vow. The wilderness was a vast, empty canvas, but the land tells no lies. I followed the story it wrote, a broken branch here, a panicked hoof-print there, and then a whisper of smoke from a dying fire, a signal of surrender. There he was, kneeling, hands bound to a tree, his face a pale mask of regret. Martha's husband, alive, but just barely, his breath a thin cloud in the biting air. I dismounted, my boots sinking into the snow, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Pastor," he choked out, his voice shaking like a leaf in the wind. I thought I could outrun what I'd done." I knelt beside him, my knife making quick work of the ropes that held him captive to his own guilt. "No man outruns the truth," I murmured, my voice low. "But the truth isn't meant to kill a soul. It's meant to set it free." He collapsed forward, gasping for air like a man who'd been held under water for too long. I wrapped a blanket around his shivering shoulders, offering grace where he expected judgment. "Why did you leave?" I asked, the question soft but direct. Tears froze on his lashes as he spoke. "I failed them. I failed my wife, my little girl. She looked at me with so much hope, and I ran. I ran instead of being the man they needed me to be." A memory, sharp and cold as ice, surfaced in my mind. A small, lonely grave, a tiny hand I couldn't save. My jaw tightened. "Running isn't the failure," I told him, the words torn from a place of deep knowing. "Staying gone is." But before he could answer, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Hoofbeats, muffled by the snow, grew closer. 5 figures emerged from the trees, their faces scarred with the kind of cruelty that thrives in the cold. Outlaws. Their leader, a man I'd had words with on the trail, offered a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "You came back, preacher. Should have kept riding." I moved without thinking, positioning myself between them and the trembling man behind me. "An unarmed man is no trophy," I said, my voice calm even. The outlaw sneered, his gaze flicking from me to the man I was protecting. "You carry a rope and a Bible. You here to hang him or to save him?" I didn't blink. Both tools serve the Lord. Which one a man receives? I gestured toward the husband. "Depends on whether he stands and faces what he's done." The outlaw's patience snapped. He drew his pistol, the metal glinting in the pale light. "You talk too much holiness for a dead man." I held his gaze, my own fear a distant echo. "It isn't death I fear," I whispered, the words steady as the coming sunrise. "It's failing the Lord's mercy." In that suspended moment, something shifted. Something broke. The husband, weak and trembling, found his feet. He stepped forward, placing himself in the line of fire. "If there's a judgment to be had, it's mine. Leave him be." That single spark of courage, of a man choosing to stand rather than run, was enough. It wiped the smirk right off the outlaw's face. A gun cocked, the sound sharp and final. But another sound answered it. A sharp whistle slicing through the trees, followed by the thunder of a dozen hooves. Sheriff Amos and the men of Red Hollow burst into the clearing, rifles raised, their faces set with a resolve that outmatched any outlaw's greed. The ambushers froze. Even a wolf pack knows when the hunt is over. They lowered their weapons, their fight dissolving into the cold air. Silence fell, but it wasn't the silence of violence. It was something else, something holy. I turned back to the husband, my question simple. "Are you going to run again?" He shook his head, a lifetime of fear and shame finally breaking. "No," he whispered, "I'm going home." I gave a single nod, a benediction and an amen all in one. The ride back down the mountain was slow, but it was a journey toward the light. Toward forgiveness waiting in the form of a wife's embrace and a child's tear-filled eyes. As we rode into Red Hollow, the town saw us. 2 men returning whole. A cry went up, and then a little girl, his little girl, broke from the crowd, running and screaming, "Papa!" with a joy so pure, so powerful that no sermon could ever capture it. From my saddle, I watched them reunite. A smile as rare and welcome as a spring thaw in deep winter touched my face. Sometimes the Lord's most beautiful hymn is simply a child's laughter. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I turned my horse back toward the horizon. The rope still swayed at my side. The Bible still rested warm against my chest. Some men ride to chase justice. I ride to deliver mercy. And in that quiet, endless world of dust and grace, I vanished down another lonely trail, not to punish the lost, but to bring them home. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales from the trail. Until next time, ride safe. Out here, under the endless sky, the sun bleeds gold across the plains, turning the dust to fire. It's a beautiful, lonely kind of quiet. The same kind of quiet that settled in my heart the day my brother walked away. Every night I sit here on this porch, the lantern painting a small circle of light in the vast darkness, and I hold his hat, this worn piece of leather. It's all I have left of him. Or so I thought. I can still see us as kids, laughing, racing our horses like we owned the wind. We were inseparable, 2 halves of the same coin. Then life happened. Pride, anger, words we both came to regret. I remember the argument, not the details, just the bitter taste it left. I see him walking away, his silhouette shrinking against the horizon until the desert swallowed him whole. A part of me vanished with him that day. Every gust of wind feels like a whisper of his name, a ghost I can't shake. The old church bell in the distance sometimes sounds like a funeral toll for a bond I thought was unbreakable. My horse, old friend, he knows. He nudges me, a silent comfort when the memories get too heavy. Inside the barn, his saddle hangs on the wall, gathering dust but not forgetting the weight it once carried. I run my hand over the cracked leather, a phantom touch of a time that's gone. At night, I light a candle by the small cross I made out of 2 branches. It's not a grave, but a marker for a hope that's nearly flickered out. A whispered prayer into the night, asking for his safety wherever he might be. But tonight was different. The wind picked up, carrying something more than just sand and sagebrush. It carried a sound, the slow, steady rhythm of horse hooves. Not mine. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked up, squinting into the darkness. A silhouette emerged from the gloom, moving with a weary grace. The horse stopped at the gate, and the lantern light cast a long, familiar shadow. A shadow of a hat. His hat. He froze. Time stopped. My voice was a dry whisper in my throat. "Jacob?" The figure dismounted, slow, deliberate. The moonlight caught his face. It was him. Older, worn down by the world, but it was him. His eyes, once full of fire and fury, were now quiet, humble. We just stood there, a lifetime of silence hanging between us. He lowered his head, a gesture of apology that spoke louder than any words. Tears I didn't know I was holding back welled in my eyes. With a creak of the old screen door, I stepped back, letting the warm light from inside spill out, inviting him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the lantern between us, 2 cups of coffee growing cold. The silence was thick with unspoken words, with years of regret. Finally he spoke, his voice raspy. "I changed, Caleb." He told me everything. About being lost, alone, humbled by the vast, unforgiving desert. About the kindness of strangers who took him in, gave him work, and taught him what it meant to earn your keep. He said he learned patience, humility, and the one truth that brought him all the way back here. Family matters. I listened, the dam inside me breaking as a single tear traced a path through the dust on my cheek. It was too much. I had to get some air. Outside, the cool night wind felt like a slap in the face. I looked up at the stars, the same stars he must have slept under, and I talked to the sky, to my own conflicted heart. Could I forgive him? Did I even know how? After all this time, all this pain, was it possible to just let it go? He waited inside, his hands twisting nervously. I knew what this was costing him. I went back in. I didn't say a word. I just handed him a piece of warm bread and a cup of water. He gave a quiet, thankful nod. And then we started talking. Not about the fight, but about our childhood. About the time we tried to catch that wild Mustang, about Mama's apple pie. The tension began to melt away, replaced by the faint echo of laughter. He showed me a small wooden charm he'd gotten from a little church out on the plains. He said he prayed every day that he'd find the courage to come home and the grace to be welcomed. My heart, a stone for so long, finally softened. A simple handshake turned into a hug, a real one, the kind we hadn't shared since we were boys. The kind that mends things without needing words. When the dawn broke, it felt like a new beginning. We fixed the fence together, the familiar rhythm of work a balm for old wounds. We laughed while mending his old saddle. I gave him a new rope. He tried to give me the hat back, but I just pushed it back onto his head. "It's yours," I told him. Always was. Later, we rode out, our horses galloping freely across the open field, the wind in our faces. We passed the old cottonwood where we'd carved our initials as kids. We both reached out and touched the weathered letters, a silent acknowledgement of the roots that still held us together. Riding back as the sun set, he looked out at the horizon, a look of profound gratitude on his face. I put my arm on his shoulder, a silent promise that he was home to stay. As we rode into town, folks saw us together. Kids waved. The church bell rang, but this time it sounded like a celebration. The warm light from the porch welcomed us home. I've learned that some men have to travel a long way to find their peace, and some, like my brother, have to travel all the way home to earn it.